You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey, welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And on this episode, we're bringing you an author chat with Canwen Xu, who joins us to talk about her debut novel, Boring Asian Female, a thriller about a Chinese-American college student who falls short of her goal of attending Harvard Law, and in her spiraling decides to stalk another student who she believes has stolen her place. As always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners, so if you've been enjoying our podcast and want to become a bigger part of our book club, head on over to patreon.com/booksandboba, where as an official member, you gain access to our members-only Discord server, where you can chat with us and fellow book club members in real time about all sorts of topics, including our monthly book club picks. And if you join us at the Honey Boba level, you also gain access to our monthly bonus podcast Boba Chats, as well as the opportunity to help us pick a quarterly book club pick. As always, thanks to everyone who's joined us on Patreon so far, and we would always love to see more of you there as well.
So we talked to Canwen about the cost of ambition, being an Asian American from a state where you are the extreme minority. And we also talked about subverting tropes in an Asian American coming of age story. So I hope you guys enjoyed this chat with Canwen Xu. And we are here with Canwen Xu, whose writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Chalkbeat, and Aerial magazine. Her TEDx talk from her senior year of high school, titled I Am Not Your Asian Stereotype, has been watched over 3 million times. And we are here to talk about her debut novel, Boring Asian Female. Welcome to the show, Canwen.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to talk to you about some unhinged Asian females. And before we get into your book, I checked out your website and found out that you have a cat. So for our little icebreaker, can you introduce us to your cat?
Oh my God, I'm so glad you asked. So my cat's full name is Princess Georgiana Caesar Xu, but she goes by Gigi. She is a British short hair who has only lived in New York City high-rises her whole life. She is the runt of her litter, so she's very small, but she doesn't like to talk about that, so just don't bring it up in front of her. And she likes very expensive things. She'll only eat food that is top-notch, expensive. If you give her a piece of steak from Trader Joe's, she won't eat it. If you give her the same cut from the butcher shop, she will love it and devour it. So yes, that is my cat.
I think it's so funny that you named her Princess Georgiana and her behavior matches her name perfectly. Like, what a bougie queen.
No, she's a princess. Yeah, absolutely. She's very petite. She's very elegant. She's very classy. She can be a little naughty sometimes. Like, she really likes to be on the laptop keyboards, and she knows she's not supposed to. So if you catch her, she'll give you this really guilty look. So yeah,
I've seen other writers, they like, because their cats love going on top of their keyboards, they would like have another keyboard for their cats to like use. So it's like a decoy keyboard. So maybe that's a strategy you might want to consider in the future.
Yes. I don't know. I feel like you're just describing my 1-year-old son. So he does the exact same things.
Yeah, basically the same. Yeah.
So you are from the Dakotas. You've also lived in Idaho. And I just want to hear your Asian American experience growing up in those places, because very different from growing up in an enclave of people who look like you. And just like curious, because your main character in your debut novel is also from the Dakotas and is also a Columbia alum.
Yeah, well, so I'll start off with just the part about growing up Asian in these Midwestern states. So that was an experience that I definitely wanted to write about, because I just felt like if I wrote about anything else, at least for my first novel, it would just feel a little bit inauthentic. And I wanted to write from a place of something that I completely understand and character who I completely understand. So yeah, so I grew up in places where I was usually the only Asian person in the room, and it is just how I was identified, right? Because it was just the defining characteristic of me for all of my friends and teachers. Maybe there would be like a couple other Asians, but it would be very much like, oh, she's one of the Asians in the school. So that was a really it was an experience that took me a long time to really unpack and come to terms with, especially when I went from being like basically the only Asian person in the room to going to college and you're surrounded by, Asians from all over, Asians from Asia, Asians from Canada, Asians from the United States. So it took me a while to figure out who I was when that wasn't just my sole defining trait, which was very liberating, but at the same time, it was very jarring as well. And then, yes, I did write about Columbia for kind of a separate reason, which is that so much crazy stuff happened when I was at Columbia. I just met so many, interesting characters, and you have people who are just very passionate about social justice or about, whatever their field is. And I wanted to kind of channel that. And I love novels that are set in college settings. So I also just wanted to bring some of that in.
So I'm looking at your bio, and we talked about you going to Columbia University. You have a BA degree in poli-sci and computer science, very different from creative writing. And we've had all sorts of writing paths discussed on our show. We've had lawyers who are like in their 40s, like pick up writing later in life. We've had people who had their first book published when they were 19 and they've been writing since they were, 5 years old. So I'm really curious to hear like what your writing journey has been. Like, is it something that you've always been interested in and you pursued it like after college, or was it something that just like came to you after college?
Writing was always something that I was very interested in. I remember when I was in elementary school, there was this competition called the Reflections Contest, and each year they have a theme.
Oh my God, the Reflections Contest.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I totally remember those. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember I think my mom was like, you should participate in this. I think one of her friends had a daughter who was participating, and it's like you get to choose which medium you want to work with. I think there's like photography, there's like drawing, there's writing. And I remember I think the first year I did like drawing or something. I've just never been a very artistic person, so I don't think I did very well, and also just it just wasn't very fun for me. And then I think the next year I found out that there was actually like a writing version that you could do, and you could actually write, a short story instead. And I was like, wow, that sounds way more interesting to me. That's a medium that I just feel a lot more connected to. So I've always loved writing. When I was younger, I wrote stories, I wrote essays. I loved writing. And then when I got to high school and it was time to think about, what do you want to major in? What do you want to go to college for? It felt like that was not a real possibility for me because, writing is not, it's not a stable path to go down, right? It's not, and definitely becoming a novelist, it was not something that I thought I could do. It's not really something that I had even considered. So I was like, well, I want to do the practical choice, obviously. My dad is a computer science professor. He really, really wanted me to study computer science. So it was terrible. There were a lot of late nights crying over code. I'm like still traumatized thinking about it, but I made it through. I got the concentration. And then with political science, that was something that I was genuinely just passionate about. So I was like, well, if I essentially double major, then my dad can't really say anything because, at least I did the computer science one. And then after college, was when I started learning how to read for fun again. It was, during college, I read so much for class, and now I finally learned how to read for fun. And I just rediscovered, my passion for how much I loved fiction. One day I was just like, well, I'm reading a lot of fiction. Why don't I try writing fiction? And it just kind of sprung from there.
I feel like that's so relatable. I feel like I remember. So I washed out of computer science because I was like I didn't want to deal with the weirder class, and so I ended up majoring in economics, which is like I think it sounds terrible saying this, but it's like it's the, I guess, lowest you can go while still studying something that your parents can approve of, because it's like kind of related to business, you know?
Yeah.
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 Wow.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who went to art school, I'm like, I can never hack it as a computer science major or an econ major. I didn't take a single math class in my college career, so yeah, I like look up to you guys, being like, wow, they're so smart. They were
No,
able
I
to
mean, I
like
was
do so
no.
much.
I was honestly, it was not something that came easily to me. I worked very hard, and people who worked much less hard than I did way better, and it was really demoralizing. So no, it was not my thing. Oh,
Oh,
and my
hi,
cat
Princess
just-
Gigi. Yeah. So I am curious as to like you started writing your novel. When was the point where you're like, hey, I could actually make this into like a published novel? Like, let me try querying. Like, at what point did you reach that step?
Well, when I started writing the novel, I actually was just out of curiosity. I was like, wait, how does one actually get a novel published? So I looked up, and I found out that it is a very long and arduous process. So I was like, okay, that's going to be in the back of my mind. And I do hope to query agents. But like this first novel, I'm just going to kind of write it for fun and do it as a side project after work and on the weekends. And then when I had like a finished manuscript, I was like, well, it doesn't cost anything for me to, query agents, right? So I had a very rough draft at that point. I had basically, spent 6 months on it. I had done quite a bit of editing, but it was now in retrospect, it wasn't where it should have been. And I got, when I was querying agents, there was one agent who was interested in reading the full manuscript, but then got back to me and said that it wasn't the right fit for her. And she had actually given me a lot of really good feedback, some of which I followed. I thought the problems she identified were correct. Her solutions weren't necessarily a good fit. But after that, I spent another year and a half just editing it. And then I got it to a point where I felt confident in the sense that I felt like it was a good manuscript. I was like, it is out of my control now, but I'm proud of what I have written. And if I don't get an agent, then that's fine. I'll just work on something else, but I'm proud of this piece of work that I created. But I did get an agent, and then that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, and now you're published. So congratulations on completing your journey. I guess we can get into it now. For our listeners who are who want to know more about Boring Asian Female, can you give us a brief pitch about what your book is about?
Yeah, so Boring Asian Female is about a senior at Columbia, Elizabeth, who measures everything by percentiles. She thinks of herself as the 90th percentile of intelligence, 70th percentile of attractiveness, etc. And her whole life's dream is to get into Harvard Law. But then she finds out that she didn't get in, and she starts spiraling and becomes obsessed with another woman in her year, Laura, who she finds out did get into Harvard Law. And then she just continues to do more and more unhinged things as her obsession increases.
So you briefly mentioned percentiles, Elizabeth's ranking of people. And I just found that so fascinating because it reminded me of like the red pill manosphere language that's being used. And like both ways of thinking involve external measurements to calculate a person's quote unquote value. And I'm just really curious as to like, how did Elizabeth's voice come to you at first as a writer? And like what made you want to use the percentiles as a value system for her?
Well, the thing is, percentiles are something that is used to measure students and just people in a lot of different ways. And, for example, when you're taking the SAT, one of the first metrics that you see is, next to your score, it's what percentile you're in for those sections. Or when you're thinking about college acceptances, you're looking at the acceptance rate. So that is implicitly a percentile as well. And I was like, what would happen if I just took a character who bought into all of these measurements that have been imposed upon all of us just, living in our current society? And that was just how the voice came out. I guess I think of myself as when I write, I like to write very directly. I like to write what I feel like is the core of the message and just get it out there rather than skirting around it. And that is how naturally the voice just came out. Because obviously, one of the key tenets in writing is to show, not tell. But there's also something interesting about telling very, very explicitly, because then in a way you're almost showing as well, because you're saying, well, by saying that so explicitly, what are you actually implicitly saying? So by saying that she's 90th percentile of, intelligence or whatever, what she's implicitly saying is that she views people in a hierarchy, and she is willing to put herself in that hierarchy. So what does that say about, how she thinks about herself and feels about herself and other people?
Yeah. I mean, so Elizabeth's worldview felt like kind of familiar to me, and you never explicitly stated, but like it felt very Chinese, like the treating of everything in life as like a zero-sum game, as every aspect being measurable. It's kind of the attitude we see in some of the more recent immigrants from China who like supported like the campaign against affirmative action, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, can you talk a little bit about what influences led you to like build like Elizabeth quirks this way, the way that you did in the novel?
Yeah, well, I mean, growing up, I felt like I was often compared to other people, sometimes other Chinese students, whether it was playing the piano or how well I did on the SAT or, what colleges you get into. It is very Chinese. And I think part of that is that the Chinese people who immigrated to the United States in, the 80s and 90s was very hard to immigrate then. So you get a lot of people who are, very high achieving in their home countries. And the way that they were able to find this materially better life for themselves and their family was by trying to get to the top in some kind of hierarchical system. So you get all of these people then, as they're having kids and they want their kids to have a better life, they're instilling these same kinds of values that got them to where they are. And then you have, all of these like Chinese people, I guess, together, right? Kind of just, egging each other on almost. So I do think that is part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And we come from cultures where, and I think it's an East Asian thing, which is like this idea of you can advance your life, get a better role if you just test really well, right? Everything
Mm-hmm.
in like our our parents' homes, everything's based on tests. Like you test in high school, you test in college, you test into civil service and all that. And I feel like that's kind of language that has been brought over. Like this is how you succeed, and this is how we're gonna like how you're gonna succeed because this is what we know,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I'm not someone who is completely against the idea of standardized tests, for instance. Like, I actually do think that they measure a lot of, I think that they can actually be very useful in certain contexts. I think where the issue comes in is when you're taking these so-called objective measurements for things and then you are tying it to someone's intrinsic worth. So I think that's where the problem is with, I think with anyone, right? It's like, they have to take a test to get into college. They find out what percentile they're in. And then it stops there. They're like, okay, I got like, a 50th percentile on the SAT. It stops there. What differentiates Elizabeth, and I think a lot of people with her mindset, some of whom come from an immigrant family, is that they view that as a direct indication of how valuable they are as a person and not just how they did on one particular test.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have had friends that like put their entire self-worth into like their tests and their scores and things like that. And it takes a while for them to like deconstruct that. And Elizabeth definitely has a lot of work to do. And reading your book, I kept thinking like Canwen, are you okay? Like, how was it writing such an unhinged character? Like,
I had a lot of fun writing it because I think I have done a lot of work to get out of a certain mindset, and it did take a lot of work. So part of the inspiration for this novel was that when I was 21, I got this super prestigious internship in finance, and I was like, well, I'm gonna make a boatload of money. I'm gonna, everyone's gonna look up to me. I'm gonna basically be better than everyone else, whatever. And the whole point of the internship was at the end of it, you get a return offer so that you get to work there full time. Most people who do the internship get a return offer. So I was kind of like, well, I'm smart, I'm hardworking, I'm gonna get the return offer, my life is set. well, that's not what happened. I did not get the return offer, and I went down my own spiral of just feeling like, okay, if that didn't work, what does that say about me? And I had tied my self-worth to all of these external validators, and that had worked, for a few years because I kept getting the external validation. But then what happens when the external validation crumbles? So I did, a lot of that work in my early 20s of trying to not to like myself and to have just intrinsic self-esteem. So when I was writing this novel, it was almost like a reflection upon my healing journey where I was like, at one point I probably did think a little bit like Elizabeth. Obviously, this is a huge exaggeration of, how I felt, but I did, feel like my self-worth was tied to these external markers. And now it's like I get to write this, and it's almost cathartic because I no longer think this way, and I can feel grateful for how I no longer think this way.
Yeah. I mean, your book's been out for over a week now. Have you been getting a lot of feedback from people reading your book about Elizabeth's journey?
Yeah, it's so funny. I think it is kind of a polarizing book. In the sense that some people they really like it, they really like unlikable female characters. They understand what I'm trying to do, which is, she's not meant to be someone who you're like, this is like such a great person. Like this is meant to be someone who are like, okay, this is a very interesting person and I can understand why she thinks this way. And I hope that eventually she learns to not think this way. And then I think there are some people who are like, oh my God, this is just too much. This is too depressing for me to read. And for those people, I'm honestly like, good for you. Like, that means that you're probably really well adjusted. Like, you're probably someone who is just naturally very, happy with themselves, like not comparing other people. And you're like, who the fuck is this? Is this crazy protagonist? I don't understand how she's realistic at all. So, but yeah, overall, I'm glad the people who like it like it.
I have to say, like, we have our annual Asian Books Challenge going on right now. And one of the prompts that we have on our reading bingo is unlikable main character. And I put your book down for that prompt because I was just like, yep, I I don't think I've read a character that is like just as unhinged and like really unlikable from like the get-go. I mean, you warm up to Elizabeth as you read, but she does kind of go down a journey, let's say.
Yeah, I was rooting for her for sure, whether or not she lived up to my expectations.
I hope she becomes okay. But Elizabeth sees herself as the quote-unquote boring Asian female, which is the title of your book. And if there's a boring Asian female, then obviously there's a cool Asian female. And she attributes that title with Laura Kim, her nemesis, who stole her spot at Harvard Law. And I thought that was interesting because I feel like Elizabeth sees Laura Kim as a cool Asian female because she appears like so self-confident, so self-assured with her class, her privilege, her proximity to like the rich white people at their school. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how these stereotypes function under the model minority myth, the boring Asian female versus cool Asian female. Like, who gets to decide that, and what are the traits that define those stereotypes?
I mean, I think a lot of being cool, to be honest, has to do with proximity to whiteness, right? Or it has to do with your proximity to, who fits the societal definition of cool. So yeah, I don't know. Like I have thought about this question a lot, but I think that, it's almost like there's certain Asian stereotypes that everyone knows. If you're very studious, if you're quiet, if you're shy and aloof, and I think that makes you kind of boring because you're just fitting what everyone's expectations are of you. And then why Elizabeth thinks Laura is cool is that she is, she has proximity to whiteness. She grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is, it's very Gossip Girl, suburban, rich, right? And I guess she attributes that to being cool. But at the same time, Laura is not that out there, actually. I mean, she's just essentially wealthy, right? She's wealthy and stylish, but it's not like she is, going to art school, for instance, or doing something that is like super out of the box. So I think it's interesting because, like, I think to be like a cool Asian female, you still have to conform a little bit to the model minority myth in that you can't be too out there, but then you have to have enough proximity to whiteness where you're not just grouped into, a stereotype the way that Elizabeth might be.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, I was thinking about this question too because because I was doom scrolling and I saw a post in I saw a post where it was on a college campus. I don't know where it was, but they were trying to do like an ABG meetup, so Asian baby girl meetup, and all the people who showed up were what we would describe as quote unquote boring Asian female. I think someone in the comments said like, this is the Bible study Asians, and like, it just like made me laugh so hard because I was like, okay, well, what's wrong with being a Bible study Asian? Like, why do we attribute that as like boring and like ABGs as like cool? Like, what is because like here in SoCal, like ABG can kind of be considered basic. So I really feel like boring depends on like where you come from and like what your perspective is on, like whiteness, I guess. So yeah, that's why I wanted to like ask that question on like your thoughts on these two stereotypes under the minority myth.
That's so funny that Bible study Asians, that's hilarious. Yeah, I'll have to use that.
So obviously you worked really hard on this book. You went through rough drafts, and I'm really curious to hear whether or not was this a thriller, a suspense novel from the get-go, or is that something that you had to add in later in your drafts?
No, that was something I had to add in. So actually, when I first started writing this, it was not a suspense thriller, any type of book like that. It was actually more just a contemporary fiction novel. It was about a girl who doesn't get into her dream law school, and she spirals, but she spirals in a way that's a lot more normal, I guess. She just kind of has mental health issues and has to go on this journey of healing and understanding, why her self-worth was tied to this so much. And then when my agent took it out on submission, I had a call with my current editor, Angela Kim, and I had great chemistry with her. I really liked her, but she was like, would you be open to changing this to a thriller? And I literally had never thought of this as being a thriller, but the more I sat on her suggestion, the more I was like, I think it could work really well as a thriller because there are suspenseful elements to it. So it's so funny when I was editing this with my agent, when we were taking it out on submission, there was no character called Laura, and now that's like basically the plot. So it's so funny how publishing works. Sometimes you have to pivot really quickly. It's like kill your darlings and then also just kill the whole story that you had previously thought you were writing about.
In this case, it's not kill your darling. It's like throw your entire manuscript overboard and start anew. I mean, what do you mean you have to start a totally different genre as like your next draft? That is a huge task. I mean, you rose to the occasion.
I mean, I think that in many ways, I'm actually really grateful for it, since I think that the manuscript now, or the manuscript, I guess now it's technically a novel, but the novel as it is now is far stronger than the manuscript that I had gone on submission with. I think that the suspense just made everything more crisp and like magnified, I guess. Like, I just felt like it rose, so the stakes are higher now, and it's just more engaging, and there's just more momentum, whereas previously it was just a bit slower. It was more vibes based, and I think there's a time and a place for that, but I'm really, really happy with how the manuscript turned out.
The suspense is crazy. For our listeners out there, if you pick up this book, it just does not stop. Like, it is a train that just keeps going, the suspense train. I'm curious as to like how did you approach like mapping out the suspense, especially since it was like not in your original idea of this book? Like was there a time when you were like, maybe this is too much, maybe I need to pull back a little bit on some of Elizabeth's decisions?
I mean, there were like a couple plot points that my agent, I think, made me take out. She was like, this is a little too crazy. She's like, this isn't gonna vibe well with your readers. So I was like, okay, fair enough. But no, I mean, it is a fine line, because on one hand, you want her to do crazy enough stuff that you're like, okay, this is really interesting, like this is fascinating, I want to keep reading. But at the same time, you still want her to be semi-relatable, and you want to show her doing normal college girl things. Like that's why you have, scenes with her friends just doing normal college stuff. Like you don't want this to just be a complete fantasy world. But in terms of mapping out the plot, I'm really not a mapper. I just kind of go with the flow and hope it works out. And then, when I go with the flow, I then go back and figure out how things tie together. So I've tried to map things out before and it just doesn't work for me.
That's really interesting, because I like, as I was reading your book, I was like, I bet she like for each draft of a chapter, she's like, how can I make it even like crazier? Like what? I could just like imagine like a chart and being like, okay, this is where like crazy part 1 goes, and then this is like totally when Elizabeth go off the rails. I feel like you raise the stakes so well with each chapter, which is why I thought you like were a planner. So it's really impressive that you kind of went with the flow on your drafts.
Well, I had the general idea of like, I want to escalate things a little bit every single time. And when I was first thinking, I was like, okay, what is the maximum thing? What is the worst thing she can do while still seeming like, not really that crazy? And that was how I came up with the idea of, and this is not really a spoiler, but I guess you can stop listening if you really just want to go in totally blind. But, there's a scene where she touches Laura's coat, and I was like, I think this is the tipping point. I think this is the moment when she goes from, this is still, kind of weird, but like not, totally weird. But then it's after this point where she really starts to go downhill.
Yeah, I mean, something that I really found amusing, and I think kind of makes more sense now that I know that what this book was originally was, you subverted a lot of tropes of like a typical Asian American coming of age story, right? Like typically when you have like a main character like Elizabeth with like academic tunnel vision, like the story arc follows them as they come to terms that like there's more to life than what they think is the only path. But throughout your book, I feel like Elizabeth has several conversations that could have served as that point of catharsis with like her supporting cast of characters who are actually pretty healthy. Like her friends I found have a pretty healthy outlook on like life and ambition, but none of it sticks, right? Like it was frustrating as well as like really funny. Like, can you talk about like how you made, like why you made Elizabeth so set in her ways that even several moments of catharsis in your book couldn't shake her?
Yeah, well, I think that it follows some of my own journey where when I was in college, I would have these glimmers of clarity and I would be like, what am I doing? Why am I so obsessed with getting like an A in this class? Or why am I so obsessed with, it was literally like, touch grass. Like I would go away for like spring break or something and touch grass. And then when I was touching grass, I'd be like, man, we take ourselves way too seriously in college. Like, why do we do that? And then I come back and it just disappears after a few days. So I don't know. I felt like that was really similar to my journey, because oftentimes healing is not a breakthrough moment. Healing is like, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, or like 6 steps forward, 5 steps back. And that's kind of the journey that she goes along as well. And it wasn't until, really everything fall apart that she had to, come to terms a bit more with her mindset.
Yeah. I mean, Marvin mentioned, a healthy support network that Elizabeth has. And one of the things that I really loved about your book was the friendship between Elizabeth and Eunjin. And there's like one scene that like really struck me. It was when Eunjin, who is like a violinist who is studying to become a professional concert violinist, she tells Elizabeth, like, I actually admire the fact that you are so practical, like you are so ruthlessly pragmatic, and that you're choosing to go a path where you could like support your family, and you know you're going for status, and that's like something that I can't do because you know, like I just can't quit music, and inherently that makes me selfish. And I was like, how did these two become friends? They have such different value systems and just like perspective on like goals. So can you tell us a little bit about like how you developed the friendship between those two?
Yeah, I almost felt it was a bit like a yin and yang, or I guess almost like a nature versus nurture, because I think Elizabeth attributes a lot of her problems to the fact that she grew up in South Dakota, but Undrin grew up in North Dakota, and she's not thinking the same way at all. So it really is almost like a further look into Elizabeth's character, where, you know, in actuality, maybe it's not her nurture, it's really her nature. In terms of how they became friends, you know, I guess it's like I also have a lot of friends who are very different from me. And I felt that that was a really interesting dynamic to write about, of how people can balance each other out. And I think Elizabeth can't be friends with someone who's similar to her, right? I think they would just clash too much. And I think Undrin probably finds Elizabeth really charming, and Undrin is so comfortable with herself that she doesn't mind all of Elizabeth's antics. Whereas someone who maybe is just a little bit less comfortable themselves is like, I can't deal with this girl. You know, she's always judging everyone.
I really like the fact that you describe them as like yin and yang. And if Elizabeth met someone just like her in college, they can't be friends because eventually it just becomes a competition and just like a clash of bombs, in my opinion. And as someone who like went to art college, like it also like reminded me of a lot of conversations I've had with like my Asian American friends who like majored in business or like computer science, and they'll be like, wow, it's so cool that like you're so brave for choosing filmmaking. Like my parents would have never. And it's just like, do you think I want to go down this path? Like, don't you? Like, I would love to pick stability over my stupid hobby, but this is, you know, like I don't have a choice because this is my nature. So I do love how you you know, had these two girls from like the same, like pretty much like the same environment, but they grew up to be so different.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought their friendship was just so endearing and dynamic.
I appreciate that. And I also think that Undrin, it helps having her in the book a bit, because it almost makes Elizabeth more likable, because you're like, well, Undrin can deal with this. So, you know, maybe I, as the reader, can also deal with this.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're like, maybe
Yeah.
reconsider your friendship with this person.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe.
So you said Laura was like not in your earlier drafts, and I'm like, how did you come up with her character? Because she is like the ideal for Elizabeth, because she is like she's AKA the cool Asian female. So how did you come about like making her a character, but also like not a character? She seems like a foil, you know, like
Hmm.
more of like a narrative device than a character. And as a reader, you find out at the end of the book that, oh, she's actually a person and not just like a list of percentiles that Elizabeth thinks Laura is.
Yes. Well, Laura is described from the perspective of Elizabeth, since the story is written in first person, and Elizabeth is obviously a bit of an unreliable narrator. So the way I pictured the character of Laura is actually not even as a person from Elizabeth's eyes, but literally as an Instagram account. Like I literally just I it's almost like I could think of her Instagram grid and what that Instagram looked like, and then put whatever Elizabeth's perception of that was. And so it is intentionally that way, so that Laura is not a three-dimensional person because she is being told from the perspective of Elizabeth. And then again, it's in the end when you actually realize, okay, that was Elizabeth's Instagram account version of Laura, but Laura is actually a person and not just, some pictures on your screen.
I just remembered one of the reasons why Elizabeth and Eunjin became friends is because they were at like an orientation for Asian American students at Columbia, and Eunjin had mentioned, because Eunjin is mixed race, she's like, yeah, like in my town, I was like the only Asian face. And then Laura's like, actually, like your experiences do not align with like my experience as a full Asian. Like we have like a very, very much otherness that you don't experience because you pass as white. And I was like, oh, okay. I would bond with like I would like make a friendship with a fellow hater too. I think there was like a recent study that said like hate is like the most powerful bond that you can base a friendship out of. And I was like, yeah. That was also like my first hint that I was like, maybe Laura isn't all that incredible as Elizabeth thinks her to be later on in the book. So
no, I actually really love that you brought up that scene, because it was one of the most poignant scenes for me just writing it. Since going back to, why the novel is set at Columbia, one thing that happened a lot at Columbia is people weaponizing social justice for their own kind of social gains, right? Because it's like Laura essentially gets to be really mean, but it's under the guise of social justice. So people can't really say anything, but she's not doing it in good faith. She's doing it in bad faith. And that's something that I kind of saw. And not to say that everyone who would say something like that is doing it in bad faith, but I specifically wanted that to come through as an example.
Yeah, it was definitely like a Regina George mean girl moment for sure. And I do love how you added different types of Asians in your book, because there's also a character who is a Vietnamese adoptee, and his personality is described as he hates everything, and that's his entire personality. He's like, oh, he's grateful that he was adopted by like 2 white gay dads, but at the same time he resents it. And I was like, oh my God, I know exactly what type of Asian this is. And I just love that we can have that diversity within, this seemingly like small umbrella of Asian Americans, but it's actually not that small.
I mean, I think that, the first step in media representation is just to get people from different backgrounds on the page or on the screen. But then, and I talk about this a lot, the step after that is actually making them human, where, if it's like the first time where you're ever putting an Asian person on like a, in a big film, or you don't want them to be super unlikable, you probably are going to make them kind of someone you want to root for. And part of what made me want to write this novel was like, well, I feel like we have a lot of likable Asian characters now. I was like, what if I subvert that and write someone super unlikable, but then also really human in that way? And also, put in these characters who are also, kind of unlikable, but then you also have likable characters, but that's just being human, right? So it's almost seeing Asians as human, where some are annoying and some are really likable. And you have both.
Some of us fall under the stereotypes, but we're also human. And we also like, I feel like that is something that college admissions like really lacks, because it's like they're seeing you by percentiles like Elizabeth, and it's like, okay, like what makes you a different Asian? And it's like, well, because they're a person, like people are different. Like you can't just judge them based on like numbers. And I just love that you had diversity of different Asians, and that we are encouraged to hate on them because they're not likable.
I mean, exactly. They're human, and like you're not gonna like all humans. Like you're gonna find some really insufferable, and it's the same with Leo and the other characters in the story.
Sometimes insufferable people can be right. A broken clock can be right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
And it offers us a glimpse of what unbridled ambition can lead. Like, this is what happens when you don't touch grass and can't.
A major theme in your book is,
Yeah.
obviously, like, what happens when you conflate your identity with external goals, and what happens when you don't achieve those goals. And I mean, I feel like this is something that not just Asian Americans go through, but just like any person goes through, whether you're in your 20s or in your 50s. Like, people have goals, and people use those as like measures of success, and their success, they think, defines them. So what is your advice to readers out there who feel like, I guess, they've hit rock bottom, like Elizabeth not getting into Harvard Law? Like, what would your advice be to, I don't know, like, other than touch grass, like what would be your advice to them?
Well, my advice to them is that happiness and peace with yourself truly does not come with external achievement. If you're hitting rock bottom because you didn't get something, even if you got it, that wouldn't solve the problem. It might solve it like temporarily, but it's the same thing as a drug where you're happy and then you go through withdrawal. You're always looking for the next thing. And I can say that because my dreams came true when I got the book deal, right? Like, I had always wanted to be a writer. So my dreams came true, and on paper my life was perfect, but you're always going to be anxious about the next thing. Like, oh, is my book going to sell well? Am I going to be able to sell another book? It never stops. And that's where I have to come back to myself and all of the work that I've done to actually like myself and feel secure. That ultimately is what gets me through the day, and not, focusing on these external achievements. Like, it's okay to be happy about them, but I'm happy about them in a way of like, oh, I'm really happy that this happened, not in like, I'm really happy because, oh, I'm a better person because this happened to me.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. I don't want to bring the topic back on goals, because we just talked about, like, be happy and be proud of yourself for like where you are in the present. But do you have anything lined up for the future? Are you working on another book?
Yes. So I actually got a 2-book deal when I sold Boring Asian Female. So I will be writing the second book with the same publisher. It is actually about a serial killer piano prodigy, and it's really fun because I played classical piano actually for, oh gosh, like 10 or 11 years. And I was competitive at a certain point. And yeah, so it was really fun to bring in a lot of those elements.
She's
That
singing
sounds like
your
my
tune,
book.
Lyra. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I love murder books. So yeah. I'm
Yeah,
definitely
you'll
like a
love
true
this.
crime
Mhm.
girly. So
Lyra
I'm so
also has a
excited.
classical music background as well, right?
Oh, no way. What did you play?
That is true. I was an oboist, and my
Okay.
family is full of classical musicians professionally. So
Oh, wow. Okay,
I have
that's a lot of
zero
pressure.
musical talent. I was just kind of forced into playing that instrument. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, why didn't I turn into a serial killer? I feel like I went through so much during that time.
Yeah.
But this was a super fun chat. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, Canwen.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really love this conversation. I love books. I love boba. So this is great.
Yeah. Congratulations on your debut, and thanks for joining
Yeah.
us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that was Canwen Xu. Her debut novel, Boring Asian Female, is available now at booksellers everywhere, including, as always, the Books and Boba online bookshop. So if you enjoyed our conversation with Canwen and want to pick up Boring Asian Female, you can do so by heading on over to booksandboba.com and checking out our bookshop link. As always, all purchases made on our online bookstore support not only us at Books and Boba, but also your local bookstore. So thank you to everyone who supported us there so far. Before we go, Rira, can you remind us what book we are reading for book club for May 2026?
Yeah, so we are reading No No Boy by John Okada, and it is a book that came out in the 1950s. So it is probably the oldest book that we are reading for this book club podcast. This was Marvin's pick, and we just thought that reading a classic Asian American literature novel who was, that was just like a pioneer in our space. Oh, God, let me redo that. So we are reading No No Boy by John Okada. It came out in 1957, so this is the oldest book that we are reading for our book club. This was Marvin's pick, and we decided that reading an Asian American lit classic would be a great way to mark APAM this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since we read like a quote-unquote Asian American classic, and the current state of the world and our country being as it is, I did keep thinking about the story in No No Boy, which I read almost 20 years ago now in college for my Asian American Lit class. And I feel like the story that takes place in the immediate aftermath of World War II about Japanese Americans returning home after their incarceration without due process and asking questions about what loyalty really means. I feel like those are all really important themes that is worth revisiting now in our year 2026. So definitely looking forward to everyone's thoughts on the book as we read along. The reading schedule is on Discord, so if you are a patron supporter, our conversation is ongoing. And yeah, we'll be discussing this book at the end of the month. So if you have any feedback after you finish the book or any questions you'd like us to answer, please let us know either on Discord or on our Goodreads forums. And we always love to hear your feedback on our book club picks whenever possible. But yeah, that'll do it for this episode of Books and Boba. Thank you once again to Canwen Xu for joining us, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Riri Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hungry for spicy food and even hotter conversations? Craving community and authentic storytelling? Then join the table. This is Minor Legends, a new comedy fiction podcast supported by Potluck. Pull up every week with me, Angela Wong Carbone, and follow the stories of me and my friends as we serve up tasty tales of what it means to be Asian American at our weekly dinner hang. If you enjoy deep dishing on absurd stereotypes like tiger moms who tutor your dating game rather than grades, the insanity of your parents' immigration story, to the legend of that one good Asian cousin you can never live up to, then pull up a seat and grab a plate. Featuring dinner guests like Ronnie Chang, Brian Park, Usama Siddiqui, Celia Au, Perry Young, Supriya Ganesh, and more. It's a tasty rotation that'll leave you belly laughing and steeped in relatable and spicy conversations. Can you take the heat? Listen now for free wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, I'm Kim Cooper, and I co-host the podcast Asians in Baseball alongside Naomi Ko and Scott Okamoto. Asians in Baseball is exactly what it sounds like, a podcast about the Asian and Asian Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Americans in Major League Baseball. Every week, we break down the highlights of what's going on with Asians in baseball and then take a deeper dive into the Asian and Asian Americans past and present who have shaped baseball as it is today. Whether you're Kim Ng's #1 fan or you've never even heard of Hideo Nomo, we've got something for everyone, especially for the Shohei Ohtani stans. Maybe too much for the Shohei Ohtani stans. Listen to Asians in Baseball wherever you get podcasts, part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.